This episode of Lunduke Show is brought to you by viewers like you over at Patreon. And normally, the Lunduke Show is brought to you by System 76 and Pogo Linux. Not this episode. This episode is not brought to you by System 76 and Pogo Linux. It is brought to you strictly by you guys because this episode I am reviewing a piece of hardware from System 76, and I don't want it to get weird. I mean, I already get sponsored by System 76. I don't want to have the show, the actual episode in which I am reviewing one of their rigs, also sponsored by them. So this one's just sponsored by you guys. That's it. Now, before we get started on this, this is the rig that I'm going to be reviewing here. This is the Meerkat from System 76. A beautiful, tiny, little awesome guy, right? Just a totally awesome little rig. Here's the thing. Clearly, I am biased. Let's get this right out of the way, right? I do a show sponsored by people who make Linux hardware, but I also talk about Linux hardware a lot. So I gotta talk about the hardware they make sometimes. I mean, I'm gonna have to review them, and I want to do it honestly. And I think the folks at System 76 know that I'm not going to beat around the bush. If they send me a piece of gear and it's crummy, I'm going to say it's crummy. Either I'm not going to review it, or I'm going to review it and tell you guys it's crummy, but they make other good gear. Here's the thing. This is a really good little rig, but it's really specific in how I think it is best used. So let's dive into this. So what is this little guy? This is the Meerkat. It is a 4-inch by 4-inch cube. It's a very, very tiny little guy, right? Super, super tiny, super quiet. I don't think there's any fans in there. You shake it, you don't hear any. I taxed this out during the testing of it, and I never heard a single fan kick on. So if it has fans, they're broken, but unnecessary. My guess is it doesn't have any fans. Very, very quiet little machine. So what would I use this machine for is a really big question. A really, really big question, because this is a nice small form factor. Oh, it's cool. If I hold it in front of my eyes like that, it makes it look like the Geordie LaForge visors a little bit from Next Generation. That's totally awesome. I can see the spectrum waveographs. All right. Everything aside, I use two different types of machines. One of them is a really big rig. I use a System 76 Wild Dog Pro big old tower. It's a beast of a machine, and that's what I make these shows on. I do my gaming on that machine because it's awesome at it. It's got a really big, beefy, nice, huge video card in it, tons of RAM, lots of expansion base. It's a media production powerhouse of a rig. And then for all of my other computing, I use little tiny devices like this little Nokia N810 that was produced 27 million years ago, or my little pocket chip, or Raspberry Pis. I've got like 87 million Raspberry Pis doing different things around my house, and those are all great machines. They're tiny, extremely inexpensive, low-powered machines for specific tasks. This machine is in the middle. Right? It's super tiny, which is great. It's not terribly expensive. Let's talk about that briefly. This machine, I believe, starts out at $599. Does it start out at $599? Let me double check that here. The machine, as it's configured right here, it costs $887, but I've got kind of a nice rig. Yeah, $599. $599 is the base configuration for these. So they're not like Raspberry Pi price, right? You're not going to go up and plop down 30, 40 bucks and have a tiny little machine, but it's also a huge amount more powerful than a Raspberry Pi. So what this has got in it. So the one I've got right here is 880. It's got a current gen, 7th gen Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, a 250 gig, this is really nice, the 250 gig M.2 SSD, a really, really nice little hard drive for such a little device. The graphics on it is a little Intel 620 GPU, right? So realistically, in terms of performance, this isn't all that much different than like a top-of-the-line ultra portable laptop. Like if you go to System 76, you could get like a Galago Pro laptop, or if you go over to Dell, an XPS 13, something along those lines. The specs are in that ballpark, right? Which means anything that you could do on those sorts of devices, this machine works pretty well at. But again, this isn't my normal kind of machine. Normally, I either go big Herkin rig or something crazy, tiny, and super cheap, right? This is in the middle. So what would I use this for? So in order to answer that, I sat down and I decided to try everything that I use all of my equipment for with this. So I started with the video. I recorded like a test episode, like a little 5-6 minute me just rambling episode using the same software and configuration I use for this show. Open Broadcasting Studio, all the same overlays, artwork, everything. And I recorded it on here at 1080p. And it worked, but there was a couple of points where it stuttered. And that's actually kind of to be expected. The way I record this is very GPU intensive. It doesn't really hit the CPU. So I had to use more of the software rendering on this one, which taxed the CPU a whole lot more, and it did stutter a little bit. Not bad, but it was noticeable, right? So I thought, okay, I used to do this show at 720p, which is still HD and still quite nice. So I dropped it down to 720p, and this handled it just fine. Multiple inputs and outputs. I tested out recording video of me at 720, and then also a 720p video of me playing a video game, and piped it all into here, into a split screen sort of setup, and it did it flawlessly at 720p. 1080p, some stutters. So obviously if I'm doing, 1080p sort of videos, this isn't going to be the guy, because it's got, it's a little tiny guy, right? Now the plus side here, no noise, no fans, nothing at all. It was super quiet, which tells me this would make a killer machine for audio production. There's way more than enough beefy juice in here to do anything you're going to want to do for audio production wise. So podcasting, etc., music production, all that sort of thing would go great on here. So if I was just doing audio podcasts, honestly, this is perfect. Absolutely perfect for that purpose. But I do all the video stuff. So, well, clearly I can't ditch my massive, amazing Wild Dog Pro for this guy. But that's fine. That's fine. Oh, and here, just so you guys get a shot of it. Here's the back of it. You got two USB ports, you got an Ethernet port, you got HDMI, and then you got the little USB Class C over there. And then on the front, you've got two more USB ports, the little audio in and out. And then over here is an SD card slot. Nice little rig, really. And there's your little keyboard lock over there. So I took a step back and I thought, okay, well, how about for games? What about for a gaming rig, right? Because this is so small and so quiet. It's got HDMI out. I could really see hooking this up to a TV. This would make a great set-top box. So I started with games. So I hooked it up to my TV upstairs, plugged it all in, 1080p, and first thing I did, installed Steam on here. I put Steam on here and threw on a couple of games, including some of the more demanding stuff, like Ark and Civilization 6. Put Civilization 6 and Ark on here, which, again, are very taxing games, especially for hardware like this. Ark wasn't so playable. Ark is a pretty taxing game for even high-end hardware a lot of times. And if I reduced all of the graphic settings to a minimum and set it up to be 720p, it was absolutely playable, but the frame rate wasn't terribly high. It was not an ideal scenario. Totally playable, but not as awesome as that game needs. Civilization 6, on the other hand, actually played pretty well. I couldn't max out the graphical settings by any stretch. The graphic settings had to be lowered down, but the game was totally playable. I mean, then again, it's a real-time it's not a real-time, it's a turn-based strategy game. So, frame rate isn't quite as big of a deal as it is on a shooter, etc. Played that just fine. Now, the nice thing here is I feel like if you're getting this rig, this little beautiful little rig here, there you go. You see it has a little laser engraved, laser etched System 76 logo on top. It would be great for an emulation rig. So I tested out with emulators. Obviously, all the major emulators are going to run fine on here. You're going to be able to emulate, PlayStations and everything else on here up to a certain point really, really pretty well. So hooking this up to a TV and playing games works great as long as you are understanding that it only has an Intel 620 GPU. That's the bottleneck here. The CPU is fine. I mean, it's an i3, but it's a pretty fast i3, and a nice i3 coupled with a great graphics card goes a long way in gaming. This guy, you know, the GPU on it's just not enough to do really high-end gaming. But like great games from 2 or 3 years back play really well on here. Rocket League played pretty well on here. Every other game I tried played pretty well. Arc was the big problem because Arc just doesn't like those sorts of lower end GPUs. So then I went over to playing video. Obviously, video playback, streaming services, everything like that plays well on here. I mean, it just does. You're not going to have any issue outputting a 1080p, and I don't have a 4K TV set to test this on, but I wouldn't anticipate you'd have any 4K issues either, but no issues whatsoever. I don't even know that it really broke a sweat playing back anything on any streaming service, on any local files, etc. Did just fine with that. So it's kind of awesome as a set-top box. As a set-top box, this is killer because you've got all the USB ports here. So what I would almost do, and I tested this out with wired controllers. Well, one wireless mouse and a wired keyboard and a wired gamepad controller. But, you know, you get a couple, you got 4 USB ports here, two wireless gamepads, boom, over here, wireless keyboard, wireless mouse. You lay on your couch, you lay in bed, and you've got really a powerful little beefy rig, and that's not bad. So for that purpose, I think this is ideal. This is possibly the most ideal sort of setup for this. Currently, I use Raspberry Pis for that sort of thing, and that's fine. You know, it's all right. Actually, that's not true. I also have, but I don't use it anymore, an old NVIDIA and careful there, NVIDIA Shield. Oh man, I'm going to hear about that one. That was totally a slip. NVIDIA Shield TV set-top box. Works great, right? Runs Android, but I don't really like using Android for my TV stuff because it makes me a little uncomfortable. So I use my Raspberry Pis hooked into my TV, and that works really well. But for those, you really aren't going to play any modern games. You're going to be able to play emulators, but only up through realistically the 16-bit generation. You really want to get into later emulators, you know, Nintendo 64s and Dreamcast, etc. The Raspberry Pis, we could have a debate about whether or not they're up for the task, but it's a little bit difficult. Now, granted, lots and lots of old games are fantastic, so that works really well for me because I like old games. But if I want to play newer games, I'd say this is a far better rig for that sort of thing. So, TV set-top box, that's the way to go. Video editing. So recording, I did encounter some stutters when I was recording at 1080p, like I was saying before, but when I sat down to do an edit on it, because I wanted to see how fast I could render a 1080p 5-minute clip, the same project files. I did it on the Wild Dog Pro here, the massive beast, and on this little guy. The Wild Dog Pro rendered the whole thing in about 1 minute, so at about 5 times actual playback speed, which is fantastic. You know, just done rendering. I love this rig. This little guy did it in about 5 minutes. So rendered a 1080p clip in roughly real time. Now, it wasn't a terribly complex clip, and I rendered it all in Kdenlive, rendered nice and easy. I didn't encounter any problems. It was a 5-minute render job. It did the same job, it ended up in the same file size, basically. I mean, it was good, right? So for actually editing HD clips, this ain't bad. This is not a bad rig, actually. Live streaming and live recording directly into this box, that's where it's going to come up against the bottleneck because of the GPU. Now, obviously, this, and I just keep holding it because it's so tiny, makes a great office machine, right? So if I had a business, this would be great for that. You're not going to live stream games with this unless you're live streaming a 720p stream of lower end games. You're just not going to do it, right? Most other purposes, though, this is actually a pretty nice rig. You know what this would also do good for is a dedicated little server rig. because it's fast enough. It's cool enough. It's got a lot of expansion options. I mean, it's all USB, but like if you have a home server and you want to just put a couple of extra terabytes of storage, you get a couple of, USB drives, stack them underneath this little bad boy, and you could have a nice little dedicated home server. So that would work out pretty well with this too. I like this. I like this machine. I've been wanting to play around with it since I was down at the System 76 offices earlier in the year, back in, I don't know, what that, February, something like that. And I was playing around with this, and I have a thing for tiny equipment. Like okay, that again came out weird. I like small computers, is what I meant to say. My God. But this is a really nice little rig. I've been wanting to play with it, but again, I haven't had much need to play with it. You know what I mean? Like, I have my big rig. I have my tiny little Raspberry Pis. I just didn't need a super tiny, here, I'll hold it up right so you can see the little logo because it's pretty. I just didn't need this rig. I didn't need it for me personally. Now that I've had one, and I've had one for over a week, and been playing it all around the house, plugging it in different places, I really like it. I really, really do. I'm realizing that there really was a hole in my computing usage needs. Like my Raspberry Pis are great, but I needed something in the middle. The Meerkat from System 76, you can get it at system76.com, really, really fit the bill. I was really impressed with this. It's a really nice machine. I like that it's quiet. I like that it's sturdy. I like that it's got good expansion ports. It's got everything that I need in it. Would I have bought one by myself if I hadn't tried it out and really thought, hey, what could I use this for? I probably wouldn't have. But now that I've tried it, well, now I kind of want to buy one. So choose for yourself if this makes sense for you. But I think it's kind of a rad little dude.